67% of people who try to bank in Singapore fail to open an account because they keep making 3 critical mistakes. And these mistakes are stopping them from opening accounts with some of the safest, most secure, and most reputable banks in the world, which are in Singapore. So in this video, I'm going to share these mistakes, and I'm going to tell you the easiest and fastest way to determine if you can open a Singapore bank account for yourself, using a proven process that we've come up with after helping thousands of people open international accounts. So let's start with the 3 mistakes. And mistake number 1 is thinking you can bank in Singapore in the first place. Now, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's just a fact. Not everyone can bank in Singapore. And there's a strong possibility that you, watching this video, won't be able to bank in Singapore either, because there's a very specific list of who can and can't bank in Singapore, and it's determined by your country of residence, so where you live, as well as your country of citizenship, where you're from. And I'm going to share this restricted country list with you in a minute, so you can quickly determine if you qualify to bank here or not. But first, I'm going to introduce the other 2 mistakes. And mistake number 2 is selecting the wrong bank in Singapore. See, Singapore banks have different requirements, preferences, deposits, and even customers that they're willing to serve. So you need to choose a bank that matches your profile before you apply. Otherwise, you're just going to be wasting your time. And this goes way beyond deciding between DBS and OCBC. I'm talking about understanding the lesser known preferences that Singaporean bankers won't tell you, but they do tell me. So I'm going to be breaking down 4 of these lesser known requirements with you in a minute, right after we cover the restricted countries. But first, we need to talk about mistake number 3, which is not having enough money. Because when it comes to banking in Singapore, as a foreign non-resident, we're not talking about retail banking. We're talking about premier, offshore, and even private banking. So a $5,000 deposit, it's not going to cut it. But there is some flexibility, depending on where you're from and the type of account that you want to open. So, after I share the restricted countries and give you the 4 lesser known requirements, I'm then going to give you a breakdown of the deposit requirements across the different types of Singaporean banks. That way you can eliminate all of the guesswork and just decide whether or not you can qualify to bank in Singapore in the first place. Though if you'd like a more personalized assessment, you can also click the link in the description, fill out the form, and we'll tell you which countries best match your goals, needs, profile, and deposit amount. It's 100% free, and you'll get an answer in less than 24 hours. All right, restrictions. More specifically, citizenship and residency-based restrictions. This table includes the countries that will not be able to bank in Singapore, most of the time. And I only say most of the time because there are some exceptions. Though even if you do qualify for an exception, I don't typically recommend banking in Singapore. And I'll tell you why in a minute, right after we dig into this table. So the table is set up like this. First, you have country, followed by whether residents of that country can open a bank account in Singapore. Then we have a second column, which determines if a citizen of the country residing in a qualifying country, think a neighboring country like Malaysia, can open a bank account in Singapore or not. Just to be clear, we're talking about non-resident accounts. So I'm not talking about people who live in Singapore, because in basically all cases, Singaporean residents can open a Singapore bank account. All right, the table. Now, first up is Canada. Residents of Canada cannot bank in Singapore, but Canadians residing in neighboring countries can open a Singaporean bank account. And the same is true for most EU countries, like Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, France, and other EU or EEA countries, as well as the United Kingdom and Australia. Now, Russian citizens are going to struggle to open Singaporean bank accounts whether they live in Russia or abroad. And here, it's really going to come down to source of wealth, the timing of that wealth generation, and their ongoing ties to Russia. Ukrainians will have a bit of an easier time opening here, but they will still have to face enhanced due diligence requirements around source of wealth and economic ties to Ukraine if they live outside the country. And US citizens, they're going to struggle to open in Singapore no matter what. Now, like I said, there are exceptions to these restrictions. So before I tell you the 4 lesser known banking requirements for Singapore, I want you to know if an exception is possible for you or not. And what we're really talking about here is money. How much money you're willing to park with Singaporean banks. If you're willing to put down a few million, say between 3 million and 5 million, you'll almost always be able to bank in Singapore, even if you live in a restricted country, even if you live in the United States. Now, Russian and Ukrainians, you're probably still out of luck unless you're willing to come in with, say, between 5 million and 10 million, but ultimately, you're going to have better banking options elsewhere instead. And that's true for everyone who qualifies for an exception. Because like I said, if you manage to secure an exception, I don't typically recommend banking in Singapore because you won't be able to access anything more than a basic bank account. No investments, no products, no value-added services. Basically, you just get a savings account with the highest deposit requirement known to man. And frankly, there's no need to do that because there are other excellent banking options available for you to choose from. Banks in places like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Austria, even Hong Kong. So the point is, if you're cut off from Singapore, don't worry, there are other options that you can access. Though, like Singapore, many of these other places do have lesser known requirements that banks don't typically share publicly. So let's talk about the lesser known requirements in Singapore. And then I'm going to break down exactly how much money you're going to need to deposit to bank in Singapore in the next section of this video. All right, so the first requirement is in-person meetings. See, depending on which bank you decide to open with, you may be asked to show up in person to open that account. This isn't always the case, but certain banks do still impose in-person meetings on foreign non-residents, unless you live in certain whitelisted countries. This includes places in Southeast Asia like Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, as well as other Asian countries like China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And of course, there's other closely linked countries like India and the United Arab Emirates. If you live in these countries, you can open at pretty much any Singaporean bank 100% remotely. But if you don't live in these countries, certain Singapore banks will demand that you show up in person to open an account. So you need to know which banks align with your profile and allow you to open remotely if that's a priority for you. Now, the second lesser known requirement is that you need to invest. See, a lot of people come to us looking for a Singapore bank account because they're looking for greater security, stability, and diversification. But they might not be looking to invest. And for Singapore banks, that can be a problem because certain banks restrict account opening to clients who are looking to invest through the bank. Now, this isn't the case at every bank in Singapore, but it is the case with a lot of them, which is why you need to be careful where you decide to open if investing through the bank isn't something that you want to do. Now, the third lesser known requirement is that you need to show liquidity. This basically means you need to show that you are a sophisticated investor. And unfortunately, this isn't a self-certification check where you can just tick the box. Certain Singapore banks want to see at least 1 million in liquid net worth before allowing you to open an account. And just to be clear, they're not asking you to deposit that 1 million in the bank. It could be a few $100,000 depending on the level that you open with, which we'll cover in a second. But they still want to see that you're a sophisticated investor, as determined by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And as a result, they'll look for you to provide financial statements demonstrating $1 million in liquid net assets. And finally, the fourth lesser known requirement is that you need to show a tie to the region. Basically, there needs to be something linking you to Singapore or Southeast Asia more broadly. Now, this isn't to say you can't open in Singapore without a tie to the country or even the region. You can, and we help clients do it all the time. But not having ties limits your options and makes it considerably harder to open accounts. Of course, there is a silver bullet that can overcome this and the other lesser known requirements, as well as the standard requirements that we've already discussed, which is money. And as promised, I'm going to break down the specific deposit requirements for you in the easiest way possible right now. And then I'm going to share the easiest and fastest way to determine if you can qualify to open a Singapore bank account by yourself for free. Okay, so deposits. Now, there are 3 levels of banking that foreigners can access in Singapore, ranging from $200,000 up to $5 million. And for simplicity, I'm talking in US dollars here. Now, Premier Banking is the first level of banking that foreigners can access, which is the main type of account that foreign non-residents ask for when they want to open an account in Singapore. This can go by different names, such as Premier, Prestige, or Priority Banking. Different banks call it different things, but basically, regardless of the name, you need between $200,000 and $270,000 to get in, depending on the bank that you decide to open with. Of course, there are still restrictions, requirements, and you need to be from a qualifying country. But generally speaking, if you can deposit between $200,000 and $270,000, there are banks in Singapore that you can access. Now, the next level is what we'll call Premier Private. Now, every bank calls it something different, but basically you hit this level when you cross the $1 million deposit level. It's going to give you access to a wider range of investments, more personalized support and advisory services, and generally it's more geared towards wealth management. There's also some cost and fee savings as well. But Premier Private isn't the final level, because next up is private banking. And in Singapore, you're typically looking at between $3 million and $5 million US to break into the private banking world. depending on the specific bank that you're considering. But as I've said in recent videos, the majority of our clients who open private bank accounts in Singapore, they typically live in Singapore, structure wealth management vehicles in Singapore, or have plans to relocate to Singapore in the near future. So if you fall into these categories and you're looking to start a private banking relationship with between $3 million and $5 million US, Singapore could be worth considering. In fact, at any of these deposit thresholds, Singapore is one of the best places to bank anywhere in the world, if you can get in. Which brings me to the easiest and fastest way that you can tell if you qualify to bank in Singapore, which is filling out the free assessment linked in the description below. It takes you less than 2 minutes, and our team will tell you if you qualify or not. It's that easy. And we'll even tell you if Singapore is the best place for you to bank. Because while it is one of the best options available anywhere on the planet, it's not the only option available to you. And there's one other country that Singapore gets compared to more than anywhere else in the world: Switzerland. But this comparison, it's not fair. And in this video right here, I tell you why, and I give you a raw side-by-side breakdown of banking in Singapore and banking in Switzerland to make sure that you choose the right country when it comes to opening your accounts.